Hey guys, and welcome to the next part of my Warframe series, which I've decided to call Fixing Warframe. I know it's not that creative, but I gotta start somewhere now, don't I? Anyways, this video is going to be covering enemies, how to properly implement higher difficulty enemies properly, which Warframe really does have a problem with. And I do know that this is coming right before a big update where they will be implementing a new type of enemy, which is the Kuvalich. And I would be very happy for this video not to age well if it meant that Warframe was taking a step in the right direction, but you never know with DE sometimes. And I also wanted to get this video out sooner rather than later. So with all that being said, let me go ahead and ask that you like the video if you think Warframe needs more difficult enemies, and let me go ahead and ask that you subscribe since I am a new and very small YouTube channel. Every little bit does help. Also, I now have a Twitter up and going, so you can go over there and give me some direct feedback or tell me what games you would like me to cover or review. I'm also working on a Discord, which I will have that link up in all of my video descriptions whenever that's ready. Well, with all that out of the way, let's just jump right on into the video, shall we? First and foremost, if Warframe is going to have successful high-end content, aka in-game, sustainable content, a reason to keep playing the game, then Warframe needs to stop relying on enemy scaling for their difficulty, and instead of that, they need to develop more interesting enemies that have way more complex mechanics than what they do right now to actually carry the game. And I mean enemies that have real mechanics. Not the BS that's in the game right now, like Energy Drain and Bubble McNoFun over here, that's designed just to block Warframe powers because DE doesn't know how to deal with them. And God forbid if we talk about the knockbacks from the Profit Taker fight that turns us into a pinball just because we need a reason to have knockback resistance. Now, to give credit where it's due, Warframe does have a few good boss fights, namely the newest mini-boss thing that they've implemented in their Nightwave, the infested whatever you call it. That's fairly good mechanics there, definitely with what they have to work with. So we know Digital Extremes can actually pull off decent mechanics, but I feel like most of the game just relies so heavily on enemy scaling that they can't do much of anything else. And you see, there's a number of problems with just scaling health and damage to fake challenging content. The most prominent, and the one that I'll be focusing on, is that it really isn't fun. I mean, once you know how to deal with the base level enemy, anything that's higher level just becomes a more tedious version. A bullet sponge that you just have to waste ammo and your time dealing with. And to illustrate, all the enemies that I'm facing in Warframe right now, in the background footage, act the exact same no matter how high level they get. At no point did I ever worry or felt like I was in any form of danger. I just knew how to deal with whatever was thrown at me. And it never changed from there on. In fact, we ended up only having to leave because someone had to be somewhere and, well, again, he was the host. So what could you do? You don't feel like host migrating in the middle of missions like that. And this is a particular problem in Warframe in Pacific. You're forced to wait for an hour to about 2 hours before enemies really start becoming worth killing. They're really just stand there and just take bullets and just disintegrate otherwise. But back to the problem of scaling enemies. It prioritizes grinding gear over getting good at the game, since it's more time efficient to just overpower the enemies with mods and stats rather than skill. This then becomes a feedback loop that further disengages players from proper gameplay, which ultimately ends up in a dev versus player standoff. And if you played games long enough, you know how that turns out. Now, to fix this, the best thing that I can say is to really redo the AI system from the ground up. We've gotten Movement 2.0, Damage 2.0, Melee 2.99, whatever they're at this point. I don't know, maybe they'll actually be at 3.0 by the time I release this. Probably not, though. Well, it's about time that they really rework the enemies, because it's about time that we get Enemies 2.0. An important part of looter shooters that I think a lot of people forget, you have to have something worth shooting and killing to make the loot worthwhile, because otherwise it's just a pretty toy that you get to look at and not really play with. And to show how to do good enemy AI, I'm just going to use examples that I find that are great from other games, preferably not other looter shooters, because that never ends well with the Warframe community. But let's look at the Dead Cells enemies, which, by the way, to sum up what Dead Cells is, it's a cross between Dark Souls, Metroidvania, with a little bit of roguelite, which, if you like any of those things, go pick up that game. It's great, really. How have you not gotten it yet? Anyways, Dead Cell enemies progressively become more deadly due to not just the amount of damage they can deal, but they'll find other ways to put you 6 feet under in general. Take this bird-looking monstrosity. The first time you see him, he'll probably wipe the floor with your face. Unless you already know to bait him to do a ground slam, which opens him up to attacks long enough to actually kill him, or just shoot him out of the air to drop him to his death. This guy is also introduced at higher boss cell difficulties, which is the different difficulty scales in the game. Which is why I chose this game to showcase my point, because Dead Cells doesn't just scale health and damage, they evolve the threat that players face at each difficulty tier. This moves us to the important part of this section: what are good mechanics and enemy design for Warframe? And I've came up with 4 points. Clarity, force your players to react and think on their feet, deadliness, and reward/payoff. Okay, so the first is self-explanatory. Everything that is important should be made painfully obvious. If you've done this right, your players should know when they're about to get nuked. The answer to the threat might not be as clear, but they should clearly see it coming. This is usually accomplished with some sort of wind-up animation or tells that the enemy gives, or some sort of ground placement. One example of the latter is during the Eden fight in 14, where the boss disappears off to one corner and the floor just starts to glow bright orange. You know you're going to be face tanking the floor if you don't start moving your ass to that corner. Now that moves us to the next point, which is easier said than done. The enemies should be able to counter the player's actions and force them to think on their feet and change their strategy and playstyle accordingly. The best thing that I can come up with is the Doom Eternal gameplay footage during QuakeCon, where the creative director does a TED talk while he plays the game.
You know, and it's make your way through. I mean, some of the one-ups are pretty hard to get to.
Yeah, some of them are easy, some of them are harder. Yep.
Cool.
Anybody could make a hard game. It's easy to make a hard game. Just do like hit scan enemies that, like, you know, shoot you in the head and spawn behind you. We wanted to make a game that was like a combat puzzle. So the solution is to be aggressive, and you see that when you play the demo. So it's more of like something that's worth your time to master, to increase engagement levels for you guys so you feel really engaged or thinking. It's not just hard for the sake of hard. With the AI, I was trying to, you know, I'm trying to talk, and I was trying to rush in to like deliver the blood punch, but he has kind of this area of denial attack where he shoots the ground with his cannons, which pushes the player away, does a significant amount of damage. So basically, we think of him like an Abrams tank. And you can't just run up to an Abrams tank, you know, like it wouldn't be an easy thing to do. So it's the AI, you know, keeping you in check and making you play the game, thinking a little bit more about the decisions you make. Like, you can't just run up to our tank and shoot it with a double-barrel shotgun point blank. He has a response to that, which will steer you into other weapons, like long-range weapons, like the Gauss or the rocket launcher.
There's no better way to explain this point other than what he just said. Good gameplay should be a combat puzzle, and that's what Warframe lacks the most in their enemies. Because the Dynasty Warrior combat style is good for casual and early game, but when you get into high-end and difficult content, less is more, and more engaging enemies are far better than just droves of mindless clone zombies and idiot robots that don't know how to protect themselves. Good quick example of that is the Monster Hunter franchise. Like I said earlier in the video, Warframe has such a high level of polish for the player character, and a lot of it's wasted because there's no good enemies to engage with. Okay, the next 2 points goes hand in hand and are pretty simple. Deadliness. things should be able to kill you and present a threat. On the flip side of that, those things shouldn't just be able to walk up to you and just put you 6 feet under because you don't have enough stats. It should put you under because you effed up and you didn't deal with the threat properly. Real difficulty is measured in a margin of error in succeeding at those mechanics and dealing with those enemies. And to increase difficulty, you lower that margin with some sort of scalar value, like the amount of time the player has to dodge an attack, or you go the route of layering mechanics together for the player to keep track more of. Now, the more deadly something is, the bigger the payoff should be. The player should feel some sort of rush for beating a hard enemy, but they should also receive some sort of edge in combat for solving the gameplay puzzle. And that pretty well describes the whole payoff / reward. It shouldn't just be loot. That pretty well wraps up this video. The next one should be about game modes and other playable content. Again, if you like the videos, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you can catch some more. And with that, I hope to see you in the next video.